It didn't add up. Why would she be gone for so long and why wouldn't she tell anyone?
Maybe she had mental health issues and she had enough.
Some people do find they can't cope with the pressures of life and wander off.
The police, they were searching the area with sniffer dogs, police helicopter.
It was much worse than we thought.
And I was like, am I under arrest then?
In the heart of the Kent countryside lies the quaint village of Northbourne.
It's a very picturesque village, very rural setting, close to the coast, and actually a lovely place to be. Lots of nice walks through the fields and woodland nearby.
Everybody knows everybody. There is that sense of community and a sense of it being a safe environment.
We have quite a nice village hall in a pub, surrounded by farmland. It's quite a nice, quiet place to live. Crime is not generally a problem here.
With such a welcoming community, it was the perfect place for Micah Cudworth to set up home.
Micah was born in Poland, but she came to live in Kent, and she came to see Kent as being her home.
She came over presumably to have a better life, to have a new adventure, and settled here and was well known and liked here.
She didn't come to England on her own. She was married before, and she came with the partner that she had at the time. But they separated, and she met Jonathan.
John was obviously a local lad and lived in this area all his life as far as he went to school in the area, joined the military, came out of that eventually and got a job here as a forklift truck driver.
Jonathan is a really sweet kid. He is really gentle, quite quiet, very reserved. And he came from a nice family. They were all good people.
With an opportunity for a second chance at love, in 2013, Micah and Jonathan tied the knot, and she found a safe haven with her new extended family in Kent.
Micah's family still lived in Poland. Her only family in England was actually Jonathan's family. She deemed her friends in England to be her family, so living and remaining here was important to her.
She was very involved with his family. They were like one big family, and I think she loved that. I think that's what her intention of coming here. She wanted that family sentiment, and, you know, she got that.
It didn't take long for the happy couple to settle in well to village life.
Micah was beautiful, funny, fun-loving. She was just a real bright energy. She could make you laugh, make you smile.
They were an ordinary young couple which was missing in the village. So it was nice, it was a pleasure to see them.
Micah and Jonathan were a devoted couple.
As any normal couple would. They'd walk down to the end of the road. Micah would go rushing off wherever work. She'd always smile, she'd always, you know, put her hand up. John, I would see occasionally on his way down to the pub, and occasionally on the way back from the pub.
And it wasn't long before Micah took up part-time work, which put her centre stage in the community.
She had a job as a barmaid in a village pub. You know, lots and lots of people would go in that pub. Quite a small size, but with a lovely big garden. And I think in that pub, it's very close-knit, you know, it's very friendly. And to have had very friendly, bubbly and attractive barmaid there, she would have been a very well-known and very well-liked girl.
8 years since her move from Poland, Micah appeared happy with her life in the UK. But she may not have been as content as it seemed.
Kent Police, where's your emergency?
Hiya, who do I report a missing person to?
Who's actually missing?
It's my wife. She came home about 11:30 because she went to meet somebody for a drink. So I had a little bit of a row and she stalled off and she ain't been back since.
So is she vulnerable in any way due to disability, mental health, or any other factors?
She has been a bit down lately.
Okay.
Micah had gone out after work and had a drink with a friend. She'd come home late. They'd had an argument. She'd stormed off. The next day, she was still missing. And then the following morning, Jonathan reported her as missing.
Worried about Micah's whereabouts, officers do a quick search of the house for clues. They discover she had taken just a few essentials with her, keys and a handbag. But her car is still in the driveway, and her mobile phone is switched off. Concerned about her state of mind, officers speak to villagers for clues.
My neighbour next door to me told me Micah had gone missing. The police came round, explained what they were doing, interviewed us all.
You know, asking the questions. Have you seen anything? Have you heard anything?
But with no information from neighbours, concern grows as to Micah's whereabouts and her state of mind. Kent Police decide to issue a missing persons appeal to the public.
We received a press release from police to say that Micah had gone missing. It's human instinct, so it instantly struck a chord and we thought, something's wrong here. It didn't add up. Why would she be gone for so long and why wouldn't she tell anyone?
Naturally you think, God, this woman must be so unwell. Maybe she had mental health issues and she kind of like had enough and left the house in the middle of the night. It was sad.
Kent Police, where's your emergency?
Hiya, who do I report a missing person to?
Who's actually missing?
In the quaint village of Northbourne, unease is growing over Micah Cudworth's whereabouts. She's been missing for more than 24 hours.
In the village, there was a real concern as to where Micah might be.
From our point of view, it was a case each day we wanted to know where was Micah, had she been found.
Concerned about her state of mind, her loving husband Jonathan has reported her missing. Worried that her low mood had led her to look for comfort outside of the family home.
So is she vulnerable in any way?
No, but she has been a bit down lately.
Okay.
You don't know, but it wouldn't be unusual. It could be some form of mental illness. Some people can't cope with the normal pressures of life and wander off.
Life gets difficult and life gets tough, which it does for all of us, and we all face challenging circumstances in our lives.
Having walked out in the middle of the night after an argument, the village can't imagine what's going through her husband's mind.
I actually reached out to John and said, hey, this is really terrible. And I remember saying to him, you know, just hang on, hopefully she's going to find her and she'll get the help that she needs.
After 24 hours with no contact from Micah and with no clues to her whereabouts, police start considering the possibility she could have harmed herself or met someone out to cause her harm. A full-scale search is launched.
Suddenly, lots of police vans turn up. From going from seeing no police cars or hardly any police cars to being descended on by police was a little bit of a shock.
The police, they were searching the area nearby. That was with sniffer dogs, police helicopter.
You bring in resources, dogs, police dogs, searching fields, especially in the rural area of East Kent, there's a vast amount of agriculture. You might get the helicopter camera up with the infrared to see if you can find someone in the field somewhere still alive.
Police continue to scour the surrounding areas and question Micah's family and friends. But it appears after walking out into the night, she simply disappeared.
Generally speaking, most missing persons turn up very shortly, certainly within, if not 24 hours sooner. This was then 30-odd hours. And then, of course, 36, 48 hours. And you always live in hope. But, of course, the longer it goes on, you always fear the worst.
As the days pass, husband Jonathan and the rest of the family desperately cling on for any hope that Micah will be found safe and well.
I was devastated for him. I felt for him, I felt for his family. I just wanted to help them, support them.
We responded as best we could, and the church was open. We had a small little area as a place where people could come for prayer and reflection.
As the local search fails to uncover any clue as to where Micah has gone, detectives decide to increase the media campaign with the hope of reaching out nationally and internationally.
Police are urging anyone who may have seen Micah Cudworth to contact them. The barmaid walked out of her home just before midnight on Tuesday and hasn't been seen since. Polish-born Micah from Northbourne was last seen wearing white trainers, grey tracksuit bottoms and carrying a black handbag.
When the police released her photograph, that's when the public interest really did peak. She looked like a bubbly, happy, kind and well-liked person. So the public interest really did come alive.
There was a lot of talk on social media. You can imagine when you live in these little villages, somebody goes missing and the local newspaper saying, you know, have you seen this person? It was everywhere.
Media campaigns are important, and very often by media campaigns and using the local media especially, you get sightings. Trouble with sightings is you can very often get people ringing in with genuine callers who believe they've seen perhaps the missing person when in fact it's not them at all. So you have to be careful that you're not taking down blind alleys.
And the longer Micah remains missing, the more rumours start to circulate throughout the village.
I think Micah, in the crudest sense, ticked a lot of boxes. As a barmaid, she would have been very popular. She was pretty attractive and supposedly quite bubbly, so she will have been very liked.
Rumours are rife, and particularly in a village. People start talking, you know, she was a little bit too fond of a customer down at the pub.
She was very friendly with certain individuals, and one man in particular, and it was suspected by some people that she was having an affair.
Could Micah be with this man? Had she walked out into the arms of a new lover? Suddenly, there's hope this could be the case. A post from Micah appears on social media, written in Polish.
Micah's friends had received Facebook messages from Micah saying, "It's okay, I'm all right, I just need some space." But that hope was soon dashed when the friends had spoken to police to say that the messages they'd received weren't quite grammatically correct.
Some of her friends were questioning the grammatical use of Polish. It wasn't her usual way of speaking, as it were, on messages.
They couldn't see that Micah would have written them like that, and something just wasn't adding up.
Clearly, if she was sending these messages out, they weren't being sent by her.
But if it isn't her, then who is writing these messages? Detective suspicion that something sinister has happened to Micah grows. And they widen their inquiries and home in on certain people.
The persons of interest would have been the man from the pub who was allegedly having an affair with her, and indeed any other customers that would be regular customers in the pub, because if she's having an affair with somebody, there'll be other customers in the pub who will be able perhaps to provide some significant information with regard to their friendship.
Police trace the man Micah is suspected of having an affair with. He admits he had a drink with Micah on the night of her disappearance. He is questioned. Concerned by the latest development, Micah and Jonathan's friends and family rally round him.
Jonathan had called some friends and asked them to come round and give them support. They came round and they spent time with him.
4 days after Micah was reported missing, Kent police make a shocking announcement.
Police investigating the disappearance of 36-year-old Micah Cudworth have said they've made an arrest. The barmaid from Northbourne went missing 5 days ago and hasn't been sighted since. Police say they are growing increasingly concerned for Miss Cudworth's safety.
What's transpired, it was, yes, much worse than we thought.
Kent Police, where's your emergency?
It's my wife. She walked out early hours Wednesday morning and she ain't been back since.
In the Kent village of Northbourne, police investigating the disappearance of barmaid Micah Cudworth now suspect she may have been murdered. Believing messages Micah sent her friends after she went missing were actually sent by someone else, police question a man she was suspected of having an affair with.
The police released a statement to say that they'd arrested somebody, a man, in connection with Micah's disappearance.
But the man they arrested is not her suspected lover, but her husband, Jonathan Cudworth.
One of John's sisters said he'd been arrested, and I was like, what?
The news sends shockwaves across the village. How could this loving husband have anything to do with her disappearance?
It's hard to describe, really. It's just a lot of disbelief, I think.
The initial reaction for people in the immediate vicinity would be shock, surprise, nice couple.
When somebody's been arrested in connection with someone's disappearance, the public interest really does step up. That's what people then really start to talk about at the school gates, in the pub.
As rumours circulate around the village, it is revealed that Jonathan has been arrested on suspicion of GBH after police visited his house and noticed drops of blood by the front door, with Jonathan admitting that he had a minor altercation before Micah stormed off. Officers secure the house as a potential crime scene and carry out a search of an outbuilding.
And it was outside by the shed that they found some drops of blood.
Inside the outbuilding, officers discover a blood-stained doormat and cat basket. Both items are immediately seized and taken for forensic testing.
I would think that was the time that this became a homicide, murder investigation.
Gradually, the realisation came that she may have actually been killed, and the police presence was becoming, in that sense, rather more sinister.
In custody, police believe the evidence points to Jonathan having more than just hit Micah.
During police interviews, he strenuously denied that he had anything to do with Micah's disappearance.
Jonathan, he was a nice lad. He wasn't mean. I don't remember him being aggressive or angry or volatile.
Jonathan admits he has Micah's Facebook password and posted messages pretending to be from her in Polish. But he says it was to stop her friends from harassing him. He says the blood found was from a minor altercation. Police decide to charge him with murder. But there's one problem. 7 days since she was last seen, there's still no sign of Micah, dead or alive. Officers widen their search both inside Micah's home and the surrounding areas. And suddenly, there's a breakthrough. A large amount of blood is discovered in the sitting room beneath the rug. And more blood is found in the boot of the family car. Police discover Jonathan had bought the rug in nearby Sandwich after Micah had gone missing. Slowly, they start to piece together Jonathan's movements since Micah's disappearance. The search for her is becoming desperate, and the family turn to their friend Ali.
Ali Austin is a psychic. She was contacted by Jonathan's family and asked if she would be able to help in the search for Micah.
So to label myself, I'm a fortune teller. I'm a psychic, I'm a clairvoyant, a clairaudient. I see, hear and sense things. And a message came through, and it was from one of John's sisters. And it said, "Hi Ali, is there any chance you can do a reading for me?" I was like, "Yeah, sure." And they were like, "Would you come out and search with us?" And I was like, "Of course I'm going to come out and search with you." And then we went off and we continued to search for 16, 17 hours a day.
We have known of a psychic being brought in before to help try to locate a body. The body has never been found, but sometimes that can be of help to the family because they feel that they're getting somebody to help them. When somebody has lost a member of their family, they will cling on to any kind of hope that they might still be alive.
I just wanted to help this family. I was just like, these poor people, this is horrific. She needs to be laid to rest. And that was all I focused on.
As Ali joins the search for Micah, along with family and friends, police discover video evidence from the night following Micah's disappearance.
A friend of mine, he had a CCTV, which was pointing out to the road. And I think it was John said he didn't go out of the property on that particular night, but it proved to be just after 2 o'clock, I think, in the morning, there was his car going by.
Detectives believe the 10-minute trip is significant in their hunt for Micah and concentrate their search to a 5-minute drive of the house. Further CCTV from earlier that day also proves key to the case against Jonathan.
There is capture of CCTV images from various areas, which includes him in a shop buying cleaning materials and attending a deal pier, throwing items which turn out, we think, to be a handbag and a phone off the end of the pier.
I think that that's a vital cog that it enabled this investigation to keep on turning and for them to find out what had actually happened.
With police believing the CCTV proves Jonathan is responsible for Micah's disappearance, it also shows he made a trip to a refuse tip with multiple large bags. The search for Micah shifts to a landfill site. As the police search spreads, Ali Austin is concentrating her search in Eastry, where Jonathan grew up.
Quite a few of us were out, and I was like, why don't I try dowsing? Dowsing is a method that has been used for centuries to find objects. Even when I say it, it sounds ridiculous, but we had nothing to lose. I was exhausted. We were in a field, and there was me and Jonathan's sisters, and I used this ring. So I took this ring, and you hold it. So we had this map, and I just got everyone to close their eyes and concentrate, and I was like, just say, Micah, like, where are you? So we were sitting there, and I'll be honest, even I'm like, this is ridiculous, you know, this is ridiculous. And the ring stopped on a point on the map, on a roundabout.
Ali and the family make their way to the roundabout and immediately begin to comb the surrounding fields.
I just remember pulling up, and I ran off away from my car, and it was a rape field, and it was like 5 foot high, and you can't move. I've never been in a rape field. You can't move in that stuff. It's all intertwined. And I remember like literally being like this in the field, running like in a zigzag. And then the next thing I know, I was standing on her. And she was in the field. So when I found her, I just remember screaming to everybody. I found her and told everybody not to move and not to come. But that was the point that her body had been abandoned, yes. And this is where we waited, and obviously it was, from that point, it was a crime scene. I didn't even think about what would happen if I did actually find her. I never gave that a thought. But then when I'm standing there, looking at her, 12 days after her life was taken, I can never unsee that.
Kent police have said that the body of a woman found in a field near Eastry in Kent is that of missing 36-year-old Micah Cudworth.
The news that everyone feared has now become a reality.
There was a real sense of grief and loss. For that to happen was, really quite shocking for people and disturbing. It's a sort of incident you would more likely expect to happen in a big city.
It's a sad thing more than anything else. And Micah was suddenly not being here anymore. It was upsetting, and there was a certain disbelief with that. When you lose anybody in a community, it's tragic, very tragic.
Micah's body is taken to the mortuary where a post-mortem is carried out to determine a cause of death.
The post-mortem reveals Micah was stabbed, I think, 4 times. It would appear she lost half the blood in her body. The injuries she sustained as a result of those stab wounds were clearly fatal.
With Jonathan already in custody, detectives turn their attention to the circumstances surrounding the discovery of Micah's body, and specifically Ali Austin's involvement.
This psychic that comes into the frame. Used to go to school, I think, with Cudworth. She practices her psychic medium, and apparently, as a result of some readings that she's done, she finds the body before the police. It's bizarre, absolutely bizarre. I would certainly be having the lady in for questioning.
Suddenly, Ali Austin finds herself at the centre of a murder investigation.
I was told to present myself at Folkestone Police Station, and I rode to Folkestone Police Station on my motorbike the next morning. And I was showed to a room, and there was 2 or 3 kind of like detectives there. And the next thing I know, they brought all these maps out, and they're going to me, put a black cross where your mum and dad's house is. So I was like, OK. So I looked at this massive aerial map. I put a black cross where my mum and dad's. They went, put a black cross where Jonathan Cudworth's mum and dad's house is. So I put a black cross where they live. Put a black cross where you found Micah. So I did that. And I remember at that point something in my head going, this isn't right. This is not, why are you asking me this? This is ridiculous. And then I asked for a break, and I went to get my cigarettes from my crash helmet, and they went, leave your helmet here. And I was like, pardon? And they were like, can you leave your helmet, please? And I was like, why, am I under arrest then? And they were like, no, but you're not allowed to leave.
Ali Austin's involvement sparks a lot of interest from the national media.
It had all of the ingredients for a juicy murder story. The first thing you think is, the husband's done it. But then, a psychic sniffs out a body. That is the sort of thing that, whether people believe it or not, they're interested in it and they want to read, they want to find out everything. It refreshed the story.
But Ali's potential involvement is soon eclipsed following a revelation that on the night of the 10th of May, Jonathan had called a family member from prison and made a startling admission.
He admitted to the crime, the killing.
During the call, Jonathan disclosed the area where he dumped Micah's body. Using this vital info, his family had then turned to Ali to help pinpoint the exact spot. Following this revelation, the police are happy she played no other part.
I do believe I was a suspect. I'm like, you know, local psychic. Maybe I put her there and then wanted the glory of, like, I found a body. Morally, like, that just rips my soul to pieces to think that at some point in a police interview room or a police station somewhere genuinely believed that I might have played a part in putting that woman there. But they don't know me. There was a lot of coincidences. You know, I can't deny that.
With Micah's body discovered and Jonathan charged, the question remains, why did this loving husband murder his wife? And how? Jonathan Cudworth has been charged with the murder of his wife, Micah. Despite the evidence against him, Jonathan pleads not guilty to murder. He claims diminished responsibility because of a momentary loss of control, and the case is sent for trial.
Having admitted to the killing and him charged with murder, it's then, of course, up to a judge and a jury, isn't it? That's all the police can do, is put forward the facts, the evidence that they can obtain, and any explanation that the defendant may give.
On the 7th December 2015, the trial begins at Canterbury Crown Court. And the question on everyone's lips is, what could have possibly led to Jonathan losing control and killing his wife, Micah?
John had a trust issues. You know, he didn't trust Micah. He thought Micah was having an affair.
My neighbour, you know, said that there was problems, probably, with their marriage. He'd heard them arguing. She met somebody else, which was one of the reasons for the domestics.
So police found that Jonathan had been tracking Micah's whereabouts through a phone app, which suggests that he had a growing sense of paranoia about where she was, what she was doing, and who she was spending time with.
The court hears what Micah and Jonathan had been arguing about the night she was killed.
Jonathan had been questioning Micah about where she'd been and who she'd been with. And he lashed out in a jealous rage.
The jury hears Jonathan's prepared statement, claiming that Micah had admitted to an affair and was goading him aggressively. The defence being that he momentarily lost control.
Jonathan said that Micah had become aggressive, and he, as a reaction, had felt around for the weapon, and he'd hit her.
This was some tragic crime of passion, that he was actually the victim of this really strong-willed woman that was having an affair. They rowed, he's gone mad, and he's put a knife in her.
The court is stunned to hear Jonathan's version of events. But had he really killed her in a moment of madness?
Crimes of passion, of course they can occur, you know. None of us could say we haven't got it in us. There's people, you know, they might do something in the heat of the moment, regret it, oh, no, and go, oh my God, you know, this has happened. It could happen to a lot of people in all different scenarios.
However, details from the post-mortem are read out in court, which questions Jonathan's defence, that he simply lashed out. Not only had Micah suffered a blunt force hit to the head, but she had bruises to her wrists and neck, along with a knife attack that the prosecution claim intended to end her life.
I realised that a crime of passion, a mistake, is maybe lashing out, pushing, shoving, You know, maybe he did. He was cutting apples at the time. Maybe he did have a knife in his hand. But she was stabbed 4 times. So she's been stabbed through her heart and then continuously stabbed on the upper part of her body, which corresponds with what my eyes saw.
And soon it becomes clear that Jonathan has a checkered history with relationships.
Police subsequently found out that there was a loose history of domestic violence, which included another ex-girlfriend and Micah herself.
The court hears there had been one prior report to the police of a domestic verbal altercation between Jonathan and Micah.
Micah notified the police that she was a victim of domestic abuse and that she lived in fear of Jonathan. This wasn't a random crime of passion.
It appears Micah and Jonathan's relationship had broken down completely, and she had made plans to leave him.
Since speaking to her family and her friends, she visited Poland 2 weeks before her death. She was leaving him. She'd saved £700, hidden in a drawer. She was going to be free of him. It is alleged that she had met somebody else, and whether she was going to have a life with them, I don't know. And she was confident that it was over. She returned to England, ready to prepare to start her new life.
But before Micah could move on without Jonathan in her life, events conspired to stop her in her tracks on the night of the 29th of April.
She'd been working at the local pub, and she came home sometime around 11:30, 12 o'clock.
Phone analysis from that evening reveals that Jonathan had become more and more irate as the evening wore on, and was continually asking where Micah was in text messages.
It transpired in court that after Jonathan had killed Micah, he dragged her body to a compost heap in the garden and left her there while he worked out how to dispose of her body.
I believe she was behind the shed and he covered her body in grass cuttings. Everyone was around, and that is where she lay.
On the next day, Cudworth has then got rid of her handbag and phone off the end of the pier and bought some cleaning up materials from a local shop.
And then he loaded Micah's body into the back of the car and drove her off to the field where he disposed of her.
The following morning, Jonathan calls the police to report Micah missing.
Kent Police, where's your emergency?
It's my wife. She walked out early hours Wednesday morning and she ain't been back since.
So is she vulnerable in any way?
No, but she has been a bit down lately.
Okay.
The extent that Jonathan had gone to conceal the fact that he had taken Micah's life. He'd tried to cover his tracks by sending messages to her friends. I get the feeling from this behaviour that it's very calculated, it's cold, and it shows no remorse.
During a gruelling trial at Canterbury Crown Court, the evidence against Jonathan appears overwhelming. A sustained, brutal attack on Micah, covering his tracks by disposing of Micah's body and her belongings, as well as a checkered history of past relationships. The jury retires to consider its verdict. Jonathan is found not guilty of Micah Cudworth's murder.
We were so surprised. We thought that there'd been such a strong case for murder against Jonathan, and to find out that he'd been found guilty of the lesser charge of manslaughter.
As he admitted to stabbing and killing his wife before the trial, the jury accepts his version of events that of killing her through diminished responsibility.
I think Mr. Cudworth was an extremely lucky person to get off a murder charge. Very lucky, I think, because I've seen cases where, you know, similar sort of things and jury have come back guilty of murder.
With the lesser conviction of manslaughter, Jonathan is sentenced to 15 years in prison.
It's appalling. It is appalling. How can her life be worth 15 years? You know, how do we stop this? How do we deter people from going that far? We need stricter sentences. You know, a life should mean life.
Even with the case behind them, the local community still feel the impact of Micah's death.
The sad thing with an event like this is it just has really horrible consequences for everybody. For the families trying to move forward in this situation, and it leaves a scar on the community.
It's her resting place, isn't it? It's not ideal. I know her resting place, final resting place is now in Poland, as it should be, but it's where her story ended, isn't it? And it should never have been that way. She didn't deserve this. Regardless of whether or not she was leaving him, regardless of whether or not she was dating somebody else, the penalty that she paid was atrocious. And it will stay with us, it will stay with me. It's an absolute tragedy, and it's a tragedy for our community.
Every shift brings more crime shockers than the last. Join the team and keep them in line Saturday at 10 p.m. in the Force North East.
This case was one of a kind. Not only the nature of it, but the brutal nature of it.
When I found out, it just floored me. How? Why could that happen?
This is an old lady who's been murdered and seriously sexually assaulted in her home.
How could somebody that I'd grown up with be capable of doing something like that?
A lot of people were generally scared.
This just doesn't look right.
There was no sign of forced entry, so it was obvious that it was somebody that she knew.
Open the door!
At this moment in time, I'm arresting suspicion of murder.
Seven miles south of Leicester, in the heart of the English countryside, lies the quaint village of Fleckney.
Fleckney is a quiet village. It's very close-knit. It's like it has its own little bubble. People are very close. Everybody knows everybody. Most people are related in Fleckney.
Beautiful rural settings, friendly people, local community is fantastic. But yeah, it's a lovely, lovely place to live and grow up in.
It's not the sort of place where a lot of crime happens. I'd been to Fleckney a few times that had nothing to do with crime. I'd been there to judge a talent contest. I think it was called Fleckney's Got Talent.
The people who live in Fleckney are generally well-to-do. It's quite a low-crime area. There are retiring people there. There's some retirement bungalows around there. There's not a lot of throughfare. The people who are in Fleckney are generally the people who live there rather than the people who visit there.
And it was this perfect, idyllic village that 72-year-old Jane Hings chose to retire to.
Jane was an only child, and her mum and dad sadly passed away years before, which left her on her own with no immediate family around. Jane was quite a private person. She didn't like everyone to know, her business, and kept herself to herself, really. But once you got to know her, she opened up more, and it was just fun. She had quirky ways about her, but she was kind and she was caring.
Everybody in Fleckney knew Jane. She relied on people to give her a lift to the hairdressers, to the shops, things like that. She was inoffensive in every way. People didn't have bad things to say about her. And in her life beforehand, she worked hard.
Jane took pride in her appearance. She'd always, regular having her hair done every few weeks, and she'd always sort of make sure she was nicely dressed and put on a bit of makeup, so she'd still try and make the effort to look nice.
Having worked overseas as a nanny, Jane had settled into retirement, whilst also taking care of her much-loved rescue dog, Paddy.
He was spoilt rotten. Everything she did was for Paddy. You'd go in, there'd be dog treats stacked up to the ceiling. We'd lie on a bed at night and could look with her.
Whilst Jane used friends and neighbours to help walk Paddy, in the summer of 2017, an accident meant she needed a lot more care.
Goodbye. Jane had a fall and was admitted to hospital for about 3 or 4 weeks.
She'd suffered some injuries when her dog Paddy had pulled her over, and then when she came out of hospital, that's when she needed the carers and she needed help in getting around, and she couldn't go very far.
But the community came together for Jane, and she slowly got back on her feet.
She was the sort of person that people warmed to, they liked her, and they were happy to help out.
Then, just a few weeks after leaving hospital, tragedy strikes.
On the Sunday morning, Jane's carers went in as they were meant to, about 7 o'clock in the morning. Jane's front door was unlocked, which is normal. They went in. She was laid in bed. The cover was pulled up over her head and both of her arms were raised above her head. When they peeled back the duvet, which had covered her head entirely, they saw that she had died.
The carers are puzzled that Jane's body is covered completely by the duvet and call for an ambulance. Then, they notice something else unusual. Items are out of place in Jane's usually meticulous house.
And when the ambulance arrived, they could see that she'd been dead for some time. And the paramedic who was there, he looked around and could see that there'd been an untidy search. Some drawers were open, some things were knocked over.
Items were strewn across the floor, drawers were open.
Here is a lady who's died with the cover over her head, with the arms raised above the head, and it looks like there's been a burglary that's taken place.
With police at the scene, suspicions grow that this is not a natural death, and the house is immediately cordoned off. But with no obvious injuries, how Jane died is still a mystery, which means detectives begin to theorise what could have happened to the pensioner.
Is it a burglary that's gone wrong? Is it Jane who's suffered a heart attack following a burglary, or whether she has passed away and then a burglary has happened afterwards, or whether this is somebody who has murdered Jane and then burgled the bungalow afterwards?
The first step for detectives is to establish how Jane died.
I received a phone call from the duty detective inspector who said they had a death. They weren't 100% happy with it, and they would value my opinion on what was going on.
Dr. Hamilton attends the scene, and as well as the unusual way Jane has been tucked into her bed, his suspicions are raised further.
And the most immediately concerning thing was that her nightdress appeared to be pulled up, and that seemed very unusual for somebody who'd simply died in their sleep. This just doesn't look right, it doesn't look normal.
As suspicions are raised that she could have been the victim of a sexual attack, Jane is taken for post-mortem. But almost immediately, everything changes.
This is HFM.
Police have launched a murder inquiry after an elderly woman was found dead at her home in Fleckney. The body was discovered in a bungalow on Elizabeth Road. It's thought the victim died at some point during Saturday evening or in the early hours of Sunday.
Whilst transporting Jane, a shocking piece of evidence has been found.
As we took the body, a tongue bar fell from one of the creases in the skin. Ms. Hings didn't have a tongue piercing, so we have evidence of somebody else very close to her body. That ultimately became one of the most important pieces of evidence in catching the killer.
On a quiet Sunday morning in the village of Fleckney in Leicestershire, residents are waking up to disturbing news of a possible murder on their doorstep.
This is HFM.
Further tests are being carried out to try to determine what killed an elderly woman in her own home in Fleckney. It prompted police to launch a murder inquiry following the discovery of her body in the property on Elizabeth Road. There were signs of a disturbance in her bungalow, which has led officers to believe she may have been the victim of a burglary.
72-year-old Jane Hings has been found dead by her carers early on a Sunday morning. Her house has been burgled, and there's signs she has been sexually assaulted. Police are treating her death as suspicious and have cordoned off the scene.
There was police tape from the tree round to the lamppost. You couldn't get to where, if you can just see that red car behind this thing, that was all blocked off as well, because that's the back of her house. It's not something we expected to ever happen in Fleckney. It's such a quiet village, a nice village. I was gobsmacked. There's something could happen like this, you know what I mean, on my doorstep, literally on my doorstep, and for people that I knew.
It's a place where you could leave your doors and windows open. Everybody knows everybody. But, you know, this sent shockwaves through the community. And I think that a lot of people would have felt generally scared.
With the village inundated with police vehicles, Jane's loved ones are also confronted with the news of her death.
I'd arranged to go over to Jane's on the Sunday morning to take Paddy for a walk. And as usual, I was running late. And I'd had no phone call, which was really strange. And then I pulled into the close where she lived and just saw loads of police cars, police vans, forensics, and yeah, that's when I found out. So I last spoke to Jane the night before. I was supposed to go and see her that day. I'd been on holiday, so I hadn't seen her for a couple of weeks. And we were on the phone for about an hour. I miss Jane. I miss the phone calls. There was so much she could have talked about her life, and I didn't get to hear any of it. And my phone is so deadly quiet all the time.
Whilst moving Jane's body, pathologists have discovered a tongue bar in her groin.
The investigation then shifted from, is this a burglary that's gone wrong, to this is an old lady who's been murdered and seriously sexually assaulted in her home.
That tongue bar was put into an evidence bag immediately. Everyone knew that this was potentially important. That went straight off. It was fast-tracked through the DNA lab.
As detectives wait for the DNA results, utmost on their mind is that this might not be an isolated incident.
One of our first lines of inquiry is to research cases of a similar nature, and we conducted a number of checks looking at anybody who was already convicted and in prison who could have been on day release for the same offence. But then this case was one of a kind. Not only the nature of it, but the brutal nature of it.
Immediately, door-to-door inquiries begin.
When officers initially attended the scene, they tried to identify people who would know Jane the last time that she was seen or spoken to.
Officers investigate whether Jane had any enemies in the village.
When we looked at Jane's past, there was no fallouts with anybody. There was nothing to indicate somebody with a vendetta, somebody with a grudge, any past history with anybody which would tell us this person has a long-running grudge against Jane and would want ill of her.
But locals have their own suspicions.
When the police first came, they said there was no sign of forced entry or anything like that, so it was obvious that it was somebody that she knew.
And it appears that whoever stole from Jane took some of her most precious items. Her wedding ring and a necklace are missing, along with her mobile phone, handbag, and £200. But police find an item they suspect doesn't belong to her.
Behind that bed, between the headboard and the wall, was a baseball cap found on the floor.
It was a designer cap, something that didn't belong to Jane.
The question police want to know is, whose hat is it? And did its owner have anything to do with Jane's death? With the post-mortem results in, it's apparent Jane has suffered a brutal attack.
Really tellingly, she had lacerations, she had tears, both to her anus and to her vagina. The external injuries were really focused around the mouth and the nose and the upper neck area. Ms. Hings didn't have that many injuries on her body, but what there was told a story. There was a little linear graze, a scratch on her neck, and we know that her necklace was missing. It would certainly fit with somebody having pulled that necklace and it scraping across the skin. The most important thing that the post-mortem brought out in itself was that there was no natural cause for her to die. No natural cause for Miss Hings to be dead. In addition, there was some quite disturbing bruising around her jawline, around her mouth, something that really makes you think we have to be sure that this woman hasn't been strangled or smothered.
Less than 24 hours after Jane was discovered, the fast turnaround DNA profile from the tongue bar is returned from the lab.
That profile was put into the DNA database and they soon had a match, they had a hit, and that match was Craig Keogh.
26-year-old Craig Keogh's DNA was on file, as he was known to the local police as a petty criminal. Now, he was part of a major manhunt.
Craig Keogh was a local lad. He grew up in the area. He still lived in the area. Craig led a transient lifestyle. He doesn't have a car, he didn't have a phone, he didn't have a job, he didn't claim benefits. So trying to work out where he lived in the Fleckney area meant we had to do a lot of inquiries at a fast pace, but in a discreet way as well.
Police managed to trace Craig to a caravan which was on the outskirts of Fleckney, but not very far from where Jane lived.
Once we'd identified that he was living in a caravan, we sent officers there.
Someone in the caravan! Police! Open the door! Police, open the door! Someone with a dark hair in there.
And there was a slight standoff of about 30 seconds where the caravan was surrounded and Craig took some time coming to the door before he was arrested.
Right, hands behind back.
Right, at this moment in time, I'm arresting on suspicion of murder. The rest is necessary for prompt and effective investigation. You don't have to say anything. Do not mention one question, something which later will lie in the court. Anything you do say may be given in evidence. Do you understand everything I've said to you?
Craig is taken into custody as detectives try to build a picture of the young man they suspect murdered Jane.
He didn't live far from Jane. He was a former factory worker. He'd been in trouble for burglary, a few break-ins and stealing from his parents and from a friend. But he wasn't known as a major criminal. He wasn't known for anything as horrific as this.
As Craig's DNA was identified on the tongue bar and in her bungalow, detectives want to know how it got there. Craig is interviewed under caution.
When was the last time you saw her then?
The last time I saw her was Sunday night.
Okay. What time would that have been?
I got there for about 10:30.
You got there at 10:30?
Yeah.
That's PM?
About 10:30 at night.
At night? Okay. So if we take from 10:30 at night then through to when you left at 11,
Yeah.
tell me exactly in detail what happened.
Well, I was watching a little film on the TV, and then she asked me to have sex with her again.
Just tell me exactly what she said to you about having sex.
She just said, "Craig, will you have sex with me?" And then, well, the first time it started off was about a month ago, and I was in the house, and then she just came into the front room naked, and then she was like, "Craig, come and do it with me, and I'll pay you."
He offered the reason that his DNA was inside of Jane and inside the scene was because Jane had paid him for sex.
Okay, and how much did she pay you?
Yeah, she paid me £200.
£200.
In the village of Fleckney in Leicestershire, police have arrested 25-year-old Craig Keogh on suspicion of the murder of Jane Hings.
Do not have to say anything. How much face do not mention one question, something which later will lie in the court. Anything you do so may be given in evidence. Do you understand everything I've said to you?
Could this local lad really be responsible for the rape and murder of a 72-year-old pensioner? The news has sent shockwaves through the tight-knit community.
How could somebody that I'd grown up with all these years could be physically capable of doing something like that? I felt sick and it was horrible. Like, who does think something like that? To such, you know what I mean? You hear about it, but she was an old lady. She was old. He was a young lad.
Keogh has been taken into custody and is being interviewed under caution. With his DNA found on the victim and at the scene, detectives want to know how Craig knows Jane. And he has an explanation.
I was walking through the village, and I saw this lady, and her shopping bag broke, and I helped her, and then I carried it to the house with her.
Craig told us in an interview that he met Jane when he was down the shops, and that she asked him to pick up some shopping for him and offered him some money for it, and then asked him to walk her dog, Paddy, as well.
But Craig alleges that it wasn't just household chores Jane was paying him for.
And then another time, she's asked me to have sex with her for money. And it happened a month ago, the first time. And then she's asked me to come back a month later. And then it happened again.
Key to the police investigation was the tongue piercing found in Jane's groin.
Have you got any piercings?
I got my ear pierced.
Your ear pierced? Okay. Anywhere else?
Yeah, my tongue pierced.
Your tongue?
Craig goes on to admit that he'd been with Jane the night she died, saying he arrived at her house around 10:30 p.m.
Tell me exactly in detail what happened.
Well, I was watching a little film on the TV, and then she asked me to have sex with her again, and she's like, "I'll pay you more this time." I was like, "Okay." I didn't think anything of it, and that was it really. And she said she felt sick, and then I left her.
Craig's detailed account that he had sex with Jane and left her very much alive turns the investigation on its head.
During the course of his interviews, he came up with an explanation as to what happened. I have to say, it was so bizarre.
Craig also suggested that Jane, whilst alive, was unwell when he left.
What he was saying was that she'd become a little bit wobbly and a little bit unwell, and had then gone back to her bed.
He then closed the door, and obviously whatever happened afterwards was someone else. Some stranger, no doubt having seen that the door was open, would have gone in there, burgled her, and perhaps killed her. And so that might possibly have been an explanation for what happened.
The interviewing officers had to keep an open mind, but had to probe and get as much detail from him as possible to find out whether it was right or not.
Was Craig telling the truth? Was Jane alive when he left? And so was it someone else who sexually assaulted and killed her? Forensics carry out a detailed search for additional DNA or fingerprints on Jane or in the bungalow.
There was nothing else from the scene, from Jane, from the post-mortem which identified anybody else other than Craig. We'd had all of these things examined, and they only pointed at Craig Keogh and did not point to anybody else.
With no one else in the frame, Craig's movements on the night in question are investigated.
Craig had been on a night out in Oadby, a nearby town.
I think it was between 8:30 he came in that night. Remember it well because Leicester City had played Liverpool on that night, so we had a fair few in. He stood out straight away because he had his baseball cap the other way around and he was just bouncing up and down.
Staff at the pub said that he appeared agitated, aggressive, and almost as if he was up for a fight. They said he was high on drink and drugs.
Now, this was crucially important evidence because in his interviews, he said that by 10:30 that evening, he was sitting in Jane Hing's living room in Fleckney, watching a war film and having a drink with her. But that was a lie. He was out with his friends. We were able, by that process, to show that he'd taken cocaine, that he was offering to sell other people cocaine, and that he was complaining about how boring the evening was.
As doubt is cast on Keogh's version of events, police trace his movements after he leaves the pub. He's next seen arriving back in Fleckney at just after 1 a.m.
His friends say that the last time they saw him was when the taxi dropped him off and they assumed he was going home.
But Keogh walks in the opposite direction of his caravan, heading in the direction of Jane's bungalow.
We knew from CCTV that the suspect had walked to Jane's house wearing a baseball cap, and when they were walking away, they didn't have it on, and we could see that.
Detectives believe this places Keogh in Jane's bungalow around 1:15 a.m. And when he returns home, he's captured again.
We see him going back into his caravan, carrying something. Now, he goes out again, and he returns out around 2:30 in the morning for another 15 minutes or so, and we are certain that he went back to Jane Hing's house in that period of time. We don't know what he did.
The following morning, Craig is again seen on camera.
The morning after he was seen walking along the street, he was captured on CCTV with a black bin bag.
He's spotted again a few minutes later, but the bag has vanished. What did he dispose of? The police believe it was some of Jane's belongings, but a search of the area reveals nothing.
This is HFM.
It's 5 o'clock. This is HFM News. Detectives have been given more time to continue questioning a man on suspicion of murder following the discovery of a pensioner dead in her bungalow in Fleckney on Sunday morning. Officers also believe items were stolen from Miss Hings's bungalow in a black bin liner. They're appealing for villagers to check their gardens and outbuildings in case it's been discarded there. A post-mortem examination has so far failed to identify her cause of death.
With help from the public and CCTV, police are able to piece together Keogh's movements 24 hours after Jane's death. Friends described Craig as splashing his cash, buying them drinks and himself a new tongue bar.
He tried to get rid of Jane's jewellery in trying to sell it. He got rid of her handbag. He was trying to get rid of every last bit of evidence that would connect him to Jane.
He went into Leicester city centre and he actually went to a pawnbroker's. He sold her jewellery for about £100 when the items of jewellery were valued around £1,000.
With enough evidence that Keogh stole items from Jane and had raped her, detectives also believe they have a killer on their hands. But proving he murdered Jane was going to be their biggest challenge.
So far as murder was concerned, we had no cause of death. We were unable to show how she died, whether it was deliberate or accidental, forensically at that stage.
In the village of Fleckney, 25-year-old Craig Keogh has been charged with burglary, murder, and the rape of pensioner Jane Hings. The news that Jane was sexually assaulted in her home has been made public.
The community were on edge already, knowing that an old lady had been murdered in her home, but then once the true nature of it came out, people were really worried.
When I found out that information, it just floored me. It played on my mind all night. You know, a woman of that age, how, why could that happen?
I'd say the villagers would be distressed because a majority of them are similar sort of age to Miss Hinks. And you know, and there's quite a few vulnerable people out there as well, and it obviously upset them, but also put a bit of fear into them as well, that this could happen on their doorstep.
Within days of his arrest, Keogh is brought before a judge and the charges read.
He pleaded not guilty to all the charges, so that was murder, 2 counts of rape and burglary.
Keogh is remanded in custody and a date set for his trial. But the work of the prosecution is only just beginning.
This was horrific violence perpetrated on a very frail old lady whilst she was still alive. And there was then the added complication of trying to prove how she died.
So one of Craig Keogh's lines of defence actually referred to him knowing Jane Hings, and yeah, he said that she paid him for sex, and that was a reason that he went around and he claimed she was still alive when he left her bungalow on that night.
Experts believe that Jane has been smothered with a pillow, and proving it was Keogh is imperative to the case.
The DNA on the pillows was of saliva, and so we could show that Jane's saliva was on the pillows. That was all.
Typically with a material object, you can't get fingerprints from it. And it's really difficult. For us as investigators, we sat there believing that the pillowcases were our murder weapon. How could we prove that?
With concern that Keogh might get away on a technicality, the police and prosecution reach out to forensic specialists.
Now, our pillowcases had been sat in the bottom of an evidence bag, sat in an exhibit store for, at this point, 4 months. They weren't laid out flat like you'd see in a movie or anything like this. This is a pillowcase shoved in the bottom of an evidence bag.
But as we got nearer to trial, we discovered a new scientific development.
Leicestershire Police said to me they had a pillowcase that they were interested in trying to develop some fingerprints on. They wanted to know whether a novel process I'd been researching was appropriate for this type of exhibit. I recommended that they tried vacuum metal deposition, and I also directed them towards Gloucestershire Police, who had a vacuum metal deposition machine that they could use and a trained operator, which is probably the best technique that we're aware of that gives you a chance of getting fingerprints on fabrics.
Vacuum metal deposition involves vaporizing gold and zinc in a vacuum chamber. The The metallic particles are attracted to the fabric and form a negative image of finger marks wherever it has been touched.
So what you have here is the image of the pillowcase as it's come out of the vacuum metal deposition machine. These dark regions where you have quite a lot of zinc deposition, and you have these light regions where zinc simply hasn't deposited. It shows whereabouts the pillowcase has been gripped, and it also enables you to say, well, it's been touched there, so you can then target other techniques such as DNA recovery for those techniques.
We were able, therefore, to show that the pillow had been held in a position that you wouldn't hold a pillow ordinarily in order to put it over Jane Hing's head to kill her.
So that proved our murder weapon. We had Keogh's finger marks on the short edge and Jane's saliva in the middle of the pillow.
But the question is, would it be enough to convict Keogh? The trial begins at Birmingham Crown Court, and Jane's friends come face to face with Keogh.
Craig was just deadpan through the whole entire time. Not an ounce of remorse, not any kind of emotion. He showed nothing.
When Craig sat in the dock, he was expressionless. It was difficult to really see any signs of emotion.
Obviously, Jane's friends are of her age, so are a lot older and didn't want to go and sit through all of that. So I went and sat for her. I didn't want Craig to think that nobody cared about her. I wanted to be seen that, you know, she meant something to somebody.
Craig had denied all along that he was responsible for raping and murdering Jane Hings. In fact, his version of events was at complete odds with the prosecution's case, the police case. He had said that he had gone to see Jane to have sex. He said that they had watched a film together that night, a war film. Checks were made, and there was no war film on TV. It was a complete and utter lie.
As the trial unfolds, the defence tried to paint a picture of Jane.
Craig Keogh was describing Jane Hings as being a sexually promiscuous, drunken woman who liked nothing more than spending her pension money on having intercourse with a young man. We discovered she didn't drink alcohol. There was no alcohol in her bloodstream after her death.
So the jury were then shown all the mobility aids that Jane had in the house, the fact that she couldn't walk between rooms without needing a walking stick or a frame.
So the idea of her being interested in active sexual activity was laughable.
Central to the prosecution case is proving that the sexual contact was non-consensual.
So we instructed an expert in sexual injuries to examine her body. And as a result of that, we were able to show that the sexual activity was not consensual activity, and it would have caused her significant amounts of pain, and it happened when she was alive.
And it was for this reason they believe Keogh decided to kill Jane.
She must have cried out when that happened, and he must have wanted not to be caught and to complete the act. And we know he did complete the act because there was semen within her body. And I expect that during the course of that sexual assault upon her, he decided to kill her because she wouldn't shut up.
Establishing that Keogh had the motive and opportunity to kill Jane, the prosecution introduces what they believe is the murder weapon.
The scientists went the extra mile on this one, because they could show that finger marks left by Keogh were on the short, straight edges at the side, and they were gripped like this and applied. And they then took it one step further to look for the amylase staining, that's the protein staining in the middle, to show that Jane had exhaled a lot and given out a lot of moisture from her breath, indicating that that's where she was smothered. And then when the scientists came to court to explain it, the jury was sat there like, oh wow, this is really impactful.
With the prosecution evidence built against him, Keogh remained silent.
Craig sat there very quiet. He chose not to give evidence. He chose not to be cross-examined by prosecutor, and he showed no remorse, even when the horrific details were read out of what he had done.
Craig Keogh could not offer any evidence which the jury could look at and say that he was not guilty. He couldn't offer any alibi, and he couldn't offer any plausible explanation as to why this had happened or why he was suspected of it.
After 5 days, the jury is sent to deliberate. Presented with all the evidence, they have to decide whether the marks at the edge of the pillow and all the new scientific data prove that the young man in front of them is a murderer.
There are two choices for a jury here. Either he went into that house and raped her and burgled the property and then left, and a random stranger came in and smothered her, or the person who raped her smothered her. That's the choice.
Even though you've listened to the whole trial and you know he's guilty, that evidence says he's guilty, those minutes, hours of waiting to hear them words, it's still nerve-wracking, you know, because they could come back with not guilty.
After 4 hours, the jury returns.
They came back and unanimously said that he was guilty of 2 counts of rape, murder and burglary.
When the jury came back, he was plainly shocked. Craig Keogh stood there, and when sentence was imposed, he stood there with an element of resignation, but he didn't seem at any stage to show any kind of remorse. No sadness for her, no sadness for his own family, who appeared to be very decent people. From the beginning to the end, it seemed to me he was entirely focused on himself.
Keogh was given a life sentence and will only be eligible for parole after 32 years. But for all involved, this case has taken its toll.
When I went into Jane Hing's house, I was struck by the peace and tranquility in which she'd lived her life. She was a very simple lady. Beside her bed on one side was her Bible and a crucifix. And on the other side, as she had gone to bed, no doubt like every other night, she'd left her teeth on the side of the bed. And imagining just being in your own bedroom, in the comfort of your own home, and having a young, strong man, plainly intoxicated and under the influence of drunks, coming into your room about 1:15 in the morning, waking you from your sleep, must have been terrifying. That, I think, stays with me.
This case will stick with me. It's one that the community will remember for a long time. It's one that the police officers who went to will remember for a long time.
I've covered numerous murder trials over the last 25 years. The rape of anyone is distressing, it's shocking, but this was particularly shocking because it involved the rape of an elderly woman.
I've been asked many times, what are my feelings towards Craig? And I have none, is the simple answer. I don't hate him because that's an emotion. I literally have no emotion towards him. But to think of what he did, it broke my heart to try and think about the fear that would have been going through her mind at the time. And then to be smothered with her own pillow. Jane was cremated and I put her ashes in an urn that sits on my mantelpiece so she can watch over Paddy every day until the day that he sadly joins her, in which case I will get him cremated and scatter their ashes someplace nice Are you gorgeous? So they can be together again.
Stranger danger is rare but not impossible. The chilling Murdered at First Sight is new Wednesday at 9 on Sky Mix.